Texas, summer of 1945. A ranch hand named Jack Morrison walked into the commandant's office at Camp Hearn, with his hat in his hands and a question that would send shockwaves through the War Department. He wanted to marry one of the prisoners, not a soldier, a German woman. The commandant stared at him for a long moment, then reached for the telephone. Within hours, officers were driving in from San Antonio. By evening, men in pressed uniforms sat around a table in a sweltering administrative building, smoking Lucky Strikes and trying to figure out what in God's name the regulations said about love. The prisoners came by rail in the spring of 1945, just as the bluebonnets turned the Texas fields into seas of purple and white. They arrived at Camp Hearn in converted cattle cars, though the Army had tried to make them comfortable. Wooden benches instead of standing room, water barrels at both ends. Still, the journey from the East Coast processing centers took 3 days. 3 days of watching America pass outside slatted windows. Endless farmland, small towns with white churches, children waving from overpasses. Anna Gerber pressed her face to the gap between boards and tried to understand this country. She was 26 years old, a native of Stuttgart, and until 6 months ago she had worked as a translator for the Wehrmacht headquarters in occupied France. The Allies had captured her unit during the final push into Germany. Not fighting, she had never fired a weapon, but shuffling papers, translating documents, trying to make sense of orders that became increasingly desperate as the Reich collapsed around them. They had told her America would be brutal. The propaganda films showed execution squads, starvation camps, cities of pure industrial ugliness where workers lived like slaves. But through the slats she saw white farmhouses with porches. She saw cattle grazing peacefully on green hills. She saw the sun set over a landscape so vast it made her dizzy. The train slowed. Dust rose in clouds that turned gold in the late afternoon light. When the doors finally opened, heat poured in like a physical force. Anna stepped down onto Texas soil, blinking against the brightness, and saw the camp spread before her. Rows of white barracks, guard towers that looked almost decorative in the gentle light. And beyond the fences, as if placed there by some cosmic joke, a working cattle ranch, cowboys, real cowboys. Men in wide-brimmed hats and boots who sat on horses and watched the arrival with expressions Anna couldn't read. One of them, a lean man with sun-darkened skin and light hair, met her eyes for just a moment before looking away. Later, she would remember that glance. How it contained neither hatred nor pity, but something else entirely. Curiosity, perhaps. Recognition of shared humanity across an impossible divide. Camp Hearn had been built in 1942 to house German and Italian POWs, men captured in North Africa, Sicily, and later in France. By 1945, it held over 4,500 prisoners on 700 acres of land leased from local ranchers. The camp sat in Robertson County, where the humid Gulf Coast met the dry Texas prairie, creating a climate that swung from pleasant springs to brutal summers in a matter of weeks. But the women prisoners were new. The Army had only recently begun transferring female POWs to American soil, and even then in limited numbers. Most were clerks, translators, nurses, women who had worked for the Wehrmacht in administrative capacities. The Geneva Conventions were clear about treatment: no forced labor, adequate food and shelter, protection from harm. But the conventions said nothing about what happened when guards and prisoners saw each other as people rather than enemies. The camp commander, Colonel Thomas Reed, was a West Point graduate who had spent 2 years managing POW facilities in Texas. He was 43 years old, methodical, and deeply aware that every decision he made would be scrutinized by military lawyers in Washington. When orders came through to accept female prisoners, he spent a week preparing. Separate barracks, female guards where possible, strict protocols about interaction with male prisoners and civilian workers. He had not prepared for what happened when the Cowboys met the Germans. The ranch hands worked for the Parker family, who owned 12,000 acres surrounding the camp. The Parkers had a government contract to employ POW labor for agricultural work, a common arrangement across America, where labor shortages left crops rotting in fields. The prisoners harvested cotton, repaired fences, fed livestock. In return, They received small wages deposited into accounts they could access after repatriation. Jack Morrison had worked for the Parkers since he was 17. Now 31, he had been declared 4F, unfit for military service, due to a childhood injury that left his right leg slightly shorter than his left. He walked with a barely perceptible limp, but he could ride better than most men could walk. He knew every fence line on the Parker Ranch. He knew which horses were gentle enough for inexperienced riders and which wells ran coldest in August. He also knew loneliness. Most of the young women in Robertson County had either left for war work in Houston or married soldiers before they shipped out. The ones who remained viewed Jack with polite disinterest. He was kind, they said, reliable. But there was something distant about him, as if he lived slightly outside the flow of normal life. That first evening, as the female prisoners were processed and assigned to barracks, Jack sat on a corral fence and watched. The blonde woman who had met his eyes earlier moved with careful precision, as if afraid of taking up too much space. She carried a small canvas bag, apparently her only possessions, and when a guard barked an order in English, she responded in heavily accented but grammatically perfect phrases. "Something on your mind, Jack?" Sam Parker, the ranch owner's son, had walked up without Jack noticing. Sam was younger, stockier, with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. "Just wondering what they think of all this," Jack said quietly. "Coming all this way, ending up in Texas." Sam shrugged. "They're Nazis, Jack. They think what they're told to think." But Jack watched the blonde woman disappear into her assigned barracks, and he wasn't so sure. The camp settled into rhythm. Dawn brought reveille, though the German women were allowed to sleep 30 minutes later than male prisoners, a small concession that caused significant grumbling in the men's compounds. Breakfast was served at 700 hours in a mess hall that had been partitioned to separate male and female prisoners. The food was better than anything Anna had eaten in 2 years. Real eggs, bacon that didn't taste of sawdust, coffee that was actually coffee. "They're trying to fatten us up before they shoot us," Helga Schneider muttered in German. Helga was 42, had worked as a radio operator in Berlin, and maintained a determined cynicism about everything American. Anna didn't respond. She had learned in France that survival often meant keeping your thoughts private, but privately she wondered if Helga was wrong. The guards were formal but not cruel. The food was abundant. Even the barracks, while Spartan, had real mattresses and screens on the windows to keep out mosquitoes. By the second week, work assignments began. The female prisoners were assigned to the camp's administrative buildings, filing, typing, basic clerical work under supervision. Anna's English made her valuable. She translated documents, helped sort mail, occasionally assisted when German-speaking prisoners needed medical attention. But 3 days a week, a different detail took them outside the main camp to the Parker Ranch. They worked in the vegetable gardens that supplied both the camp and the Parker household. They helped process eggs from the hen houses. Simple work, but outside, under the enormous Texas sky with real earth under their fingernails. Jack Morrison was assigned to supervise these details, not because he wanted the job, Sam Parker had volunteered first, but because Colonel Reed specifically requested him. "You're steady," the colonel said. "You don't rattle, and you know enough not to get friendly." So 3 mornings a week, Jack saddled his horse and rode out to meet the detail of 8 women prisoners, accompanied by 1 armed guard and 1 translator. He taught them which plants were weeds and which were vegetables. He showed them how to check eggs for cracks. He maintained professional distance and tried not to notice when the blonde woman, Anna, he learned her name was Anna, asked intelligent questions in her careful English. "This plant, it is growing. Wild? Or you are planting?" "Wild," Jack said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Pigweed. Chokes out everything else if you let it. In Germany, we have also this problem. Different plant, same," she gestured, searching for the word. "Same principle." "Yes, principle." She smiled briefly, as if pleased to have learned a new word, then returned to weeding. The heat intensified as May became June. Temperature climbed past 100 degrees by noon, turning the earth hard as concrete and the air thick enough to taste. Jack made sure the women took frequent water breaks, moving them to shade during the worst hours. The guard, a corporal named Davis who was counting days until discharge, appreciated this. He spent most of his supervision time sitting under a cottonwood tree, rifle across his lap, occasionally glancing up to make sure no one had escaped into the endless prairie. "You could run," Jack said one day, surprising himself by speaking directly to Anna. They were checking the irrigation system, walking along a fence line out of Davis's earshot. "Nothing but open country for 20 miles. By the time anyone noticed, you'd have a good head start." Anna looked at him with those steady gray eyes. "Run where?" "I am German woman in Texas. I speak with accent. I have no money, no papers, and where would I go? Germany is destroyed, my family is—" She shook her head. "Here, I am safe. I am fed. Running would be stupid." "Smart," Jack said. "What?" "You're smart. To see that." She studied him for a moment. "You are also smart. You do not treat us like enemies." "War is over," Jack said quietly. "Or near enough. Seems foolish to keep hating just because someone tells you to." That evening, Anna wrote in the small journal the Red Cross had given her at processing. The journal was one of few possessions the prisoners were allowed. A way to maintain mental health, the Army psychologist said. Anna wrote in German, careful script. "The cowboy, his name is Jack Morrison, spoke to me today like a person. Not an enemy, not even a prisoner. Just a person. I had forgotten what that felt like." The weeks accumulated. The gardens flourished under attention. Colonel Reed conducted surprise inspections and found everything proper. Work completed efficiently. Prisoners treated according to Geneva Convention standards. No fraternization. He noted Jack Morrison's professionalism in his reports, but something was growing that inspections couldn't measure. It began with small things. Jack brought extra water on the hottest days. Anna learned the English names for tools and plants, writing them phonetically in her journal. Jack found himself timing his rides to coincide with the work details, telling himself it was just good supervision. One morning in late June, a rattlesnake sunned itself near the garden gate. Anna saw it first, froze, made a small sound in her throat. Jack dismounted in one fluid motion, drew the pistol he wore for exactly this purpose, and fired. The sound echoed across the prairie. The snake twitched and lay still. Anna pressed one hand to her chest, breathing hard. "In Germany, no snakes like this." "Rattlers are common here," Jack said, holstering the weapon. "You did right freezing. They strike at movement." "You saved my life." "Just doing my job." But Anna shook her head. "No, a guard doing job would let prisoner be bitten. You are doing something else." Jack had no answer for that. He remounted and rode back to his position, but he felt Anna's eyes following him, and something in his chest tightened. July brought heat that felt biblical. The air shimmered like water, turning distant objects into mirages. Work details moved to early morning and late evening to avoid the worst hours. In the mess hall, prisoners and guards alike moved slowly, conserving energy, drinking water by the gallon. Jack started bringing a small cooler on his saddle. Ice from the Parker ranch house, wrapped in burlap. Technically allowed, he told himself. Geneva Conventions required adequate water. The fact that he packed it specifically for Anna's detail was just efficiency. Anna noticed. She also noticed that Jack always made sure she got the first cup of ice water, that he positioned the work detail in the shadiest spots, that when she struggled with a heavy bucket, he dismounted to help before she could ask. "He likes you," Helga observed one evening, back in the barracks. The women were hand-washing clothes in tin basins, hanging them to dry on lines strung between bunks. The cowboy. "He is just kind," Anna said, but her hands stilled in the soapy water. "Kind is one thing. This is different. I see how he looks at you." Anna didn't respond, but that night she lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling while Texas heat pressed down like a blanket. And she thought about blue eyes and careful hands, and a voice that spoke to her like she was human. The transformation in the male prisoners' compounds followed a different pattern. These men, Soldiers captured in North Africa and Italy had spent longer in captivity. They had formed tight social structures, internal hierarchies, ways of maintaining German military culture even behind wire. Some remained dedicated Nazis who ran informal courts against anyone who seemed too friendly with Americans. Others had grown weary of ideology, focused only on surviving until repatriation. But news traveled between compounds. Stories of the cowboys and the ranch work. Rumors that the American guards sometimes joked with prisoners, shared cigarettes, talked about baseball. And slowly, imperceptibly, something shifted. Werner Vogel, a former Wehrmacht sergeant from Hamburg, worked the cotton detail at the Parker Ranch. He had been captured at Kasserine Pass in 1943, spent 2 years in camps across Texas, and maintained a careful neutrality regarding his captors. But one afternoon in late July, when his work group finished early, Sam Parker offered them cold beer from the ranch house. "Y'all worked hard," Sam said, passing bottles around. "Figure you earned it." Werner accepted the bottle, cold and sweating in his hand, and took a long drink. It tasted like freedom, like being a man instead of a category. He thought of the propaganda films he had watched in 1939, showing Americans as cruel capitalists who cared nothing for human life. He thought of the beer in his hand, and the man who had offered it without hesitation. That evening, Werner spoke with other prisoners. Some dismissed the gesture as manipulation, but others were less certain. They remembered kindnesses, small moments that didn't fit the narrative they had been taught. "Maybe," Werner said quietly, "we were lied to." It was a dangerous thought, but once spoken, it couldn't be unthought. The chapel at Camp Hearn was a simple wooden structure, non-denominational, with a cross that could be removed to accommodate different faiths. On Sunday mornings, prisoners who wished could attend services, Catholic Mass in the morning, Protestant service after lunch. The women prisoners attended together, accompanied by guards, sitting in pews separated from the male prisoners by a central aisle. Anna had not been particularly religious before the war, but she found comfort in the ritual, the familiar hymns sung in German, the sense of continuity with something larger than barbed wire and guard towers. Jack Morrison attended the same church, the First Baptist in Hearn, 5 miles down the road. But one Sunday in early August, he found himself at the camp chapel instead. He told himself it was curiosity. Lots of locals came to observe the German services. It was a novelty, a story to tell neighbors. He stood at the back while Anna and the other women sang, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," in German. Their voices blended perfectly, harmony built from years of school choirs and church attendance. Anna's voice was a clear alto that rose above the others in the difficult passages. She sang with her eyes closed, and Jack watched her face transform, the careful guardedness falling away, replaced by something transcendent. After the service, as prisoners filed out under guard supervision, Anna saw him. Their eyes met. She nodded slightly. He nodded back, nothing more. But Jack walked to his truck feeling like something significant had occurred. That week, he spent 2 evenings in his small house carving a piece of mesquite wood. He had learned woodworking from his grandfather, found peace in the slow transformation of raw material into shaped purpose. The piece was small, 4 inches tall, a bird with spread wings. Crude by expert standards, but recognizable. He sanded it until the wood felt like silk. On Thursday, when the work detail arrived, Jack carried the bird in his shirt pocket. All morning he debated. It was forbidden. Gifts to prisoners were explicitly against regulations. Colonel Reed would have him removed from supervision duty, possibly reported to authorities. But during the water break, when Anna walked to the irrigation ditch to refill her canteen, Jack followed. He glanced back. Corporal Davis was half asleep under his tree. Other women clustered in shade 50 yards away. "I made something," Jack said quietly. "For you." He pulled out the wooden bird, held it in his calloused palm. Anna stared at it, then at him, eyes wide. "I cannot," she whispered. "It is not allowed." "I know, but I wanted you to have it anyway." Anna looked around, then took the bird quickly, slipping it into her work dress pocket. Her fingers brushed his palm. The contact lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt electric. "Why?" she asked. Jack had prepared an answer. Something about her being far from home, about small kindnesses. But standing in the Texas heat with her gray eyes searching his face, he told the truth. "Because when I hear you sing, something in me remembers what it's like to feel alive." Anna's breath caught. For a moment, neither moved. Then she turned and walked back to the group, the bird a small weight against her hip, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. That night, she held the carving in both hands, tracing the wing patterns Jack had sanded smooth. She thought of his words. She thought of how long it had been since anyone had looked at her and seen Anna, not just a German prisoner or a Wehrmacht translator or a woman on the wrong side of history. She tucked the bird under her pillow and fell asleep touching it. Word spread differently in a camp than it does in cities. Information moved through exhaled breath and sidelong glances, through shared work details and whispered conversations during meals. By mid-August, several prisoners knew that Anna had something. A gift from the Cowboy. Most said nothing. Some disapproved silently. One woman, Greta Hoffman, a former Nazi party member who maintained strict discipline even in captivity, decided it was her duty to report the violation. She approached Colonel Reed during a routine inspection. She was formal, proper, explaining that she felt obligated to report a breach of regulations. "One of the women prisoners has received a gift from a civilian supervisor," Greta said in careful English. "I believe this violates Geneva Convention protocols regarding fraternization." Reed's expression didn't change. "You have proof of this?" "I have seen the item. A carved bird. The prisoner keeps it hidden, but I have observed her with it." Reed dismissed Greta and immediately called in the female guards. Within an hour, Anna's bunk was searched. The bird was found. Anna was brought to Reed's office, standing at attention while he held the small carving. "Where did you get this?" Anna said nothing. In her time with the Wehrmacht, she had learned that silence was sometimes the best defense. "I can have all civilian supervisors banned from prisoner contact," Reed continued. "I can restrict all work details to inside the fence, or you can tell me who gave this to you and why." Anna met his eyes. "It was given as kindness, Colonel. Nothing more. Kindness is against regulations." "Then perhaps the regulations are wrong." It was a bold statement. Reed studied her for a long moment. He had daughters, 2 of them now grown, and he recognized the look in Anna's eyes. Not defiance exactly. Something more complicated. The look of someone who had found something worth protecting. He dismissed her without punishment. But he called Jack Morrison to his office that same afternoon. Jack arrived expecting the worst. Reed sat behind his desk, the wooden bird between them. "This yours? No point lying." "Yes, sir." "You know the regulations." "I do." "Then why?" Jack had spent the ride over preparing answers, professional reasons, humanitarian gesture, boost to morale. But sitting across from Reed, a man he respected, he found he couldn't lie. "Because I care about her, sir." The silence stretched. Reed picked up the bird, turned it in his hands. "You understand what you're saying, the implications?" "Yes, sir." "She's a German national, an enemy combatant. Even after repatriation, there are laws." "I know, sir." Reed set down the bird. "I should remove you from all prisoner contact. I should report this to the War Department. I should probably court-martial you for fraternization." "Yes, sir." "But the war is ending. Hell, it's over in everything but paperwork. Germany's defeated. Japan's on the edge. In 6 months, maybe less, these people go home." Reed looked tired suddenly, older than his 43 years. "Or they don't. We don't know yet what home even means for them anymore." He slid the bird across the desk. "Keep your distance from prisoner Gerber. No more gifts. No private conversations. Strictly professional conduct, understood?" "Understood, sir." But walking back to his truck, bird once again in his pocket, Jack knew he couldn't follow those orders. Something had begun that couldn't be stopped by regulations or common sense or fear of consequences. August became September. News filtered into camp. Japan had surrendered. The war was truly over. In the mess halls, prisoners and guards alike processed what this meant. For the guards, it meant going home, returning to civilian life, trying to forget the strange intimacy of watching enemies become familiar. For the prisoners, it meant uncertainty. What was Germany now? What remained of homes and families? The Red Cross had lists of casualties, cities destroyed, but information was fragmentary, unreliable. Anna learned that Stuttgart had been heavily bombed. Beyond that, nothing. Her parents, her younger brother, their fates unknown. The work details continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Guards relaxed slightly, knowing their service was ending. Prisoners moved with the peculiar tension of people waiting for a future they couldn't imagine. And Jack and Anna continued their careful dance of proximity and distance, speaking only about work, never touching, always aware of each other with an intensity that made the air between them feel charged. Jack began attending the camp chapel every Sunday. He sat in the back pews and listened to Anna sing. After services, they would nod to each other. Nothing more. But the nods contained volumes. In late September, Colonel Reed received orders from the War Department. All female POWs were to be repatriated by January 1946. The process would be gradual, highest-risk prisoners first, then working down through various categories. Anna's name was in the second group, scheduled for departure in November. Jack learned this from Sam Parker, who heard it from his father, who was on the county board that handled prisoner logistics. He had 8 weeks, 2 months before Anna would board a ship for Germany and disappear from his life forever. That realization crystallized something Jack had been avoiding. He wasn't just fond of Anna. He wasn't just attracted to her or sympathetic to her situation. He loved her. He had somehow impossibly fallen completely in love with a German prisoner of war he had barely spoken to. It was the most irrational thing that had ever happened to him. It violated every practical consideration, every social norm, every reasonable expectation of how his life should proceed. But sitting in his small house that evening, holding the wooden bird he had been forbidden to give her again, Jack knew he couldn't let her leave without trying. The problem was figuring out how. He spent a week researching. The county library had few resources, but the librarian, Mrs. Patterson, who had known Jack since he was a boy, helped him request documents from Houston. What were the legal restrictions on fraternization with enemy aliens? Could marriages between German nationals and American citizens be legally recognized? What happened to POWs who married while in captivity? The answers were discouraging. Multiple federal laws restricted marriage between American citizens and enemy aliens. Even after hostilities ended, a complex web of regulations governed such unions. The War Department had to approve. Immigration had to approve. The State Department had to issue special permissions. But there were exceptions, loopholes, cases where humanitarian considerations had prevailed. Jack made lists, drew up arguments, prepared his case like a lawyer preparing for trial. On October 3, 1945, he put on his best clothes, the suit he wore to funerals and Christmas services, and drove to Camp Hearn. He requested a meeting with Colonel Reed. The secretary made him wait an hour. When he was finally shown into Reed's office, the colonel looked at him with an expression that mixed exasperation and curiosity. "Morrison, I thought we had an understanding." "We did, sir. But I need to formally request permission to marry Anna Gerber." The words hung in the air like smoke. Reed stared at him. "Say that again." "I want to marry Anna Gerber. I know there are regulations. I know it's complicated. But I've researched the legal framework, and there is precedent." "You've lost your mind." "No, sir. I've lost my heart. But I'm thinking very clearly about the practical steps." Reed stood up, walked to his window. Outside, prisoners moved between barracks in the late afternoon heat. "Do you have any idea what you're asking? The paperwork alone would take months. The War Department would have to approve, immigration, the State Department. And that's assuming any of them are willing to even consider such a request, which I highly doubt." "But it's legal?" Jack pressed. "Technically possible? Technically, lots of things are possible. Practically, this is insane." Reed turned back to face him. She's a German national, Jack. Even if you could somehow navigate the bureaucracy, there would be consequences. Social consequences. People here wouldn't understand. Your neighbors, your employer. Mr. Parker knows. I told him yesterday. He said it was the craziest thing he'd ever heard, but if I was determined, he wouldn't stand in my way. Reed sat down heavily. Have you even spoken to her about this? Does she share your feelings? I don't know, Jack admitted. The regulations mean I can't have a private conversation with her, but I hope she might. You hope? You're willing to upend your entire life based on hope? Yes, sir, because hope is all I've got. Reed rubbed his face, suddenly looking exhausted. I need to think about this, and I need to make some calls. Come back tomorrow. Jack stood. Thank you, sir. I haven't said yes, but you haven't said no. After Jack left, Reed sat at his desk for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called the War Department's POW division. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. When he hung up, Reed made notes on a legal pad, then called the camp chaplain. I need your advice on a matter of conscience, Reed said. The War Department representative arrived 3 days later. Captain Margaret Walsh was 34 years old, a lawyer in civilian life, now serving as a specialist in POW affairs. She had seen everything in 3 years of service: escape attempts, riots, collaborations, and exactly one other case of proposed marriage between a prisoner and civilian. That case had been denied. Walsh met with Reed in his office, reviewed Jack's written petition, and asked precise questions. Why this woman? Why now? What were Morrison's intentions regarding repatriation? Had there been any inappropriate conduct? Was this request based on genuine attachment or misguided sympathy? Reed answered honestly. He had observed both parties. Morrison was serious, rational, and determined. As for the prisoner, Anna Gerber, Reed had conducted his own interview. She had been shocked by Jack's request, had not known he intended to propose, but after consideration had expressed willingness to consider marriage if it were legally possible. She was careful to note, Reed added, that she doesn't want to take advantage of him. She's concerned that he doesn't understand what he's proposing, the difficulties, the social stigma. Walsh made notes. And you? What do you think, Colonel? I think the war has created situations that don't fit into regulations, Reed said carefully. I think two people have found something rare and valuable in impossible circumstances, and I think we need to decide whether regulations serve humanity or obstruct it. Walsh set down her pen. The War Department is not inclined to approve such requests. The precedent would be problematic. With respect, Captain, the precedent already exists. We've had German prisoners working on American farms for 3 years. They've integrated into communities. Some have been treated better here than in Germany. You can't expose people to kindness and human connection, then be surprised when natural feelings develop. The emergency meeting was scheduled for October 8, 1945. Present were Colonel Reed, Captain Walsh, the camp chaplain, Lieutenant Edward Morrison, no relation to Jack, Sam Parker representing the civilian employer, and Jack Morrison himself. Anna was not permitted to attend, but her written statement, composed in careful English, was entered into the record. The meeting began at 1400 hours in the camp's administrative building. The room was stifling despite fans running at full speed. Jack sat ramrod straight, hands folded on the table, while 5 people discussed his future. Captain Walsh opened by reviewing the relevant regulations. Enemy alien status, restrictions on marriage during wartime, immigration limitations, the process of repatriation and how marriage would affect it, the potential for fraud or coercion, the precedents extremely limited of similar cases. The War Department's position, Walsh said, is that such marriages should be strongly discouraged. They create complex legal situations and potential security concerns. What security concerns? Jack asked. The war is over. Germany is occupied territory, Walsh replied. Its political future is uncertain. Allowing American citizens to marry German nationals could create. She paused, searching for the right word. Complications. Sam Parker leaned forward. With respect, ma'am, seems to me you're inventing problems. Jack here is a good man who wants to marry a woman he's come to care about. She's not a spy, she's not a threat. She's a translator who got caught up in a war she didn't start. The regulation exists for good reasons, Walsh countered. Chaplain Morrison spoke for the first time. May I add a spiritual perspective? When Walsh nodded, he continued. I've spoken with both parties separately. Their feelings appeared genuine. Miss Gerber is Catholic, Mr. Morrison is Baptist, but both have expressed willingness to address religious differences. More importantly, I believe their connection represents something profoundly important, the triumph of human love over political hatred. Isn't that what we fought the war for? We fought the war to defeat fascism, Walsh said, not to facilitate romance. Perhaps, the chaplain replied gently, we fought the war so that romance could be possible again, so that a man and a woman could meet and fall in love without a uniform, determining their worth. The discussion continued for 2 hours. Arguments were made, countered, refined. Jack spoke when asked, describing how his feelings had developed, what he envisioned for a future with Anna. He was honest about the difficulties, the social challenges, the uncertainty, but his determination never wavered. Finally, Colonel Reed called for a break. The participants stepped outside into the cooling evening air. Jack stood alone by a fence, watching the sun set over the prairie, and wondered if he had just destroyed his chance at happiness by demanding official sanction for it. Captain Walsh approached him. You understand this is nearly impossible? Yes, ma'am. You understand that even if approved, the process could take a year? That you might have to travel to Germany? That there will be investigations into both of your backgrounds? Yes, ma'am. Walsh was quiet for a moment. 3 years ago, I would have said this was categorically impossible. That fraternization with enemy prisoners was unconscionable. But I've spent 3 years managing POW affairs, and I've seen what actually happens when you put people together. They become human to each other. The propaganda falls away. And sometimes, she paused, sometimes something genuine emerges. Are you saying yes? I'm saying I'll recommend conditional approval to the War Department, with significant stipulations. Miss Gerber cannot be repatriated until her status is resolved. You'll both undergo background checks. There will be a waiting period, and the marriage cannot be formalized until all approvals are obtained. Jack's breath left him in a rush. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The War Department might still deny it. And even if they approve, you'll be waiting months, possibly longer. Walsh looked at him seriously. Are you certain she's worth it? Jack thought of Anna's voice singing hymns, her careful English, the way she had looked at the wooden bird, how her fingers had felt brushing his palm for 2 seconds in the heat. She's worth everything, he said. The War Department took 6 weeks to respond. 6 weeks during which Jack continued supervising work details with Anna present, both of them maintaining perfect professional distance, while something unspoken hummed between them like electricity before a storm. Colonel Reed had informed Anna of the meeting's outcome, that Jack had formally requested permission to marry her, that the request was under consideration, that she should think seriously about what such a marriage would mean. Anna had sat in Reed's office, hands folded in her lap, processing information that seemed impossible. He barely knows me, she said finally.